You've been invaluable in getting us to this point, Cora, but marketing has evolved, and we need someone who isn't out of touch. The words hung in the air of the conference room like toxic smoke. I maintained my professional smile, hands folded neatly in my lap, as 30 pairs of eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from shock to that most unbearable emotion, pity. 12 years of building Blue Flame Kitchen Company from a struggling startup to a household name. And this 30-something marketing director with 3 weeks of tenure was announcing my professional funeral. Across the table, Jasmine Winters, who couldn't be more than 24, waved enthusiastically, her perfectly manicured hands sparkling with rings that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. 4 million Instagram followers. Zero corporate experience. My replacement. I nodded graciously as Damien continued his speech about fresh perspectives and younger consumers, but inside, a cold fury was building, not because I'd been replaced, but because of the casual disrespect of my contributions. What Damien didn't know, what no one in that room realized, was that I had seen this coming months ago. The whispered conversations that stopped when I approached. The consultants reviewing marketing performance without including me. Damien's arrival with his LinkedIn profile full of buzzwords like disruptive innovation and digital transformation pioneer. And I had prepared accordingly. Flashback. 6 months earlier, you're bringing work stress home again, Thomas said one evening, placing a glass of red wine beside my laptop. After 30 years of marriage, he could read my tension like an open book. I looked up from the quarterly marketing reports I'd been analyzing. The numbers were excellent. Our traditional family values with modern efficiency campaign had tripled our market share in 5 years. But numbers wouldn't matter if the board had already decided my approach was outdated. The new management consultants spent 4 hours with the junior marketing team today, I told him. They asked for 15 minutes with me. Thomas settled into his favorite chair across from mine. As a professor of literature at Berkeley, he brought a different perspective to my challenges, always asking about the narrative, the underlying story behind corporate decisions. When my department hired that 30-year-old modernist scholar last year, he said thoughtfully, 3 senior professors mysteriously became emeritus within 6 months. We both knew what was happening. When you're a woman who started her career in the 80s, you learn to read between the lines. My father, who worked in manufacturing for 40 years before being early retired at 58, had warned me. In business, loyalty goes one way. What's your plan? Thomas asked. Not, how are you feeling? But, what's your plan? It was his way of reminding me that I always had options. At the law office, you created the Flame of Inspiration slogan and campaign framework before submitting it to the company, correct? Franklin Johnson asked, leaning back in his leather chair as spring rain tapped against the windows of his downtown office. Yes, I confirmed. I developed it at home over a long weekend. The company loved it and implemented it immediately. Franklin had been Blue Flame's outside counsel for years before starting his own practice. I trusted him to be discreet. And there's no work for hire agreement or intellectual property assignment for creative work done outside the office. I checked my contract twice. There isn't. A smile spread across his face. Then you should copyright it under your personal name. It won't stop them from pushing you out if that's their intention, but it gives you protection and leverage. My father's voice echoed in my memory. Always keep your best tools in your own toolbox, Cora. The company has their interests. You need to protect yours. Over the following weeks, I quietly filed copyright protections for the slogan, the campaign structure, and several tagline and creative templates, all under my personal name. These were my creations, born from my experience and insight. I didn't want revenge. I wanted respect. The final confirmation, the realization that I was being systematically undermined came gradually, then suddenly, like bankruptcy, as Hemingway would say. My invitation to the quarterly strategy meeting was accidentally overlooked. My recommendations for the holiday campaign remained under review while Damien fast-tracked his own ideas. Junior team members who used to seek my guidance now directed their questions elsewhere. Then came the moment of clarity. I was heading to the break room when I overheard Damien speaking to our CFO, Martin. We need to skew younger with everything, products, messaging, team members, Damien said, not noticing me in the hallway. Cora's demographic expertise is limited, too focused on traditional families when we need to capture Gen Z before they develop brand loyalty elsewhere. She's been instrumental in building our brand recognition, Martin replied. The board might have concerns about. Trust me, Damien interrupted. I've done this before. We'll keep her around through the transition, but within 6 months, we'll have a completely refreshed marketing approach, more authenticity, more digital engagement. She'll either adapt or. He made a dismissive gesture that finished his sentence more eloquently than words could have. I quietly stepped away, processing what I heard. It wasn't just about bringing in fresh blood, it was about erasing what I'd built and starting over. The irony was that our most successful demographic was women aged 35 to 55, not the younger audience Damien was so eager to pursue. Our market research showed they had the purchasing power and interest in high-quality kitchen appliances. But data wouldn't matter if Damien had already sold his vision to the board. The meeting. And now here I was, sitting in this sterile conference room, watching as Damien introduced Jasmine Winters to the team. She brings 4 million Instagram followers, her own successful skincare brand, and the fresh perspective we need to connect with younger consumers, he gushed. I studied Jasmine more carefully. Her enthusiastic demeanor couldn't completely mask her nervousness. I recognized her type, ambitious, intelligent, but now a pawn in someone else's game. Damien hadn't chosen her for her marketing expertise. He'd chosen her for her youth and social media presence. She would be the face, while he controlled the strategy. As the meeting wrapped up, colleagues approached with awkward condolences. This is ridiculous, Cora. You've been the backbone of this company. I can't believe they're doing this. What will you do now? I assured them I was fine. That change was inevitable in business. I maintained the professional dignity that had carried me through decades in a male-dominated industry. But inside, the plan I had set in motion months ago was crystallizing. As I packed my office that afternoon, placing 12 years of achievements into cardboard boxes, I smiled at the irony. They thought I was finished. They had no idea I was just getting started. 6 weeks later, Thomas called me into his home office where he was browsing the internet. They've launched the new campaign, he said, turning his screen toward me. There it was. Blue Flame's bold new direction. The website had been redesigned with more white space and contemporary fonts, but the content was unmistakable. The flame of inspiration slogan remained front and center. The campaign structure, my three-tiered approach highlighting quality, convenience, and community, was intact. They'd even kept my tagline, where culinary dreams ignite. The only significant change was the messenger. Jasmine's face appeared throughout the site, demonstrating products in expertly lit kitchen settings. They didn't even bother to rename anything, I said, my suspicions confirmed. They just slapped a new face on my work. Thomas squeezed my shoulder. Your move then. I nodded and called Franklin. The cease and desist letter went out that afternoon, delivered to Damien, the executive team, and the board of directors simultaneously. Franklin's language was precise and unemotional, laying out exactly which elements of the campaign were my copyrighted intellectual property and demanding immediate removal from all platforms. The response came within hours, not from our corporate legal team as I'd expected, but from Damien himself. His email bristled with indignation. This is a transparent attempt at extortion. All materials were created as work for hire under your employment contract. The company will vigorously defend its intellectual property rights. Franklin forwarded me the message with a single comment. He didn't consult legal before responding. This works in our favor. He was right. By the next morning, Blue Flame's actual attorneys had reached out requesting an urgent meeting. They weren't nearly as confident as Damien about the company's position. The Zoom call that followed was tense but professional. I sat in Franklin's office as he calmly explained that the copyrighted elements were created outside of work hours prior to submission to the company without any specific work for hire agreement covering such activities. He presented the copyright certificates with their filing dates, all preceding my departure by several months. Ms. Summers is open to licensing these materials, Franklin concluded, but continuing to use them without agreement constitutes willful copyright infringement with potential statutory damages of up to $150,000 per work infringed. The company's lead attorney, Eleanor, asked for time to confer with the executive team. Her expression told me everything. They hadn't expected this complexity. They'd assumed anything I created automatically belonged to Blue Flame. Of course they did, Thomas said when I recounted the meeting that evening. They thought they owned you, so naturally they thought they owned your ideas too. My mother had worked as a seamstress for a high-end clothing brand for 30 years. When she designed a popular pattern on her own time, the company claimed ownership. She never received recognition or compensation for her creation. I had promised myself her story wouldn't become mine. The unexpected call. The company had 24 hours to respond before we filed a formal infringement claim. As I waited, I wondered whether Damien had bothered to investigate what out of touch really meant. Thomas suggested dinner at our favorite Italian restaurant to distract me, and I reluctantly agreed. We were halfway through our pasta when my phone rang. The screen displayed a name I hadn't expected. Vivian Harper, Blue Flames board chair. I need to take this, I told Thomas, stepping outside onto the restaurant's patio. Cora, Vivian began, her normally confident voice sounding strained. I hope I'm not interrupting your evening. Not at all, I replied, watching through the window as Thomas ordered another glass of wine. How are you, Vivian? Honestly? Dealing with a situation that should never have happened. I've just come from an emergency board meeting regarding your copyright claim. My heart pounded as I waited for her to continue. The board was never informed about your departure, she said. Damien told us you had chosen to retire and were helping with the transition. When we received your cease and desist letter, well, it raised some significant questions. I absorbed this information silently. So Damien had lied, not just to the team, but to the board as well. Our legal team has reviewed your claim, Vivian continued. They believe you have a strong position. The campaign has been pulled from all platforms while we determine next steps. I see, I said, maintaining my professional tone despite the surge of vindication I felt. Cora, you built this brand. Your marketing vision defined Blue Flame. The board recognizes that and values your contribution. She paused. We'd like to discuss options for moving forward that could benefit both parties. I'm listening, I said. We're proposing a licensing agreement for your copyrighted materials with appropriate compensation. Additionally, we'd like to offer you a position as Chief Brand Officer, reporting directly to the board, not to Damien. The offer took me by surprise. Chief Brand Officer was a promotion with greater authority than I'd previously held. What about Damien? I asked. His judgment is under review, Vivian said diplomatically. I could read between the lines. His days were numbered. And Jasmine? Her contract is being reassessed. The early metrics from her campaign launch were not what was promised. I gazed across the street, watching traffic pass as I considered the offer. 6 weeks ago, I would have accepted immediately, grateful for the recognition. Now I wasn't so sure. A new beginning. During my weeks away from Blue Flame, I'd received calls from several companies interested in my expertise. One in particular, Kitchen Craft, a smaller but rapidly growing competitor, had made an intriguing offer. The Kitchen Craft headquarters occupied a renovated industrial building on the outskirts of Napa. Unlike Blue Flame's sterile corporate environment, their space featured exposed brick, warm lighting, and a fully functional test kitchen where new products were developed and showcased. Erica Donahue, Kitchen Craft's CEO, greeted me in the lobby. At 62, she represented everything corporate America often overlooked: experience, wisdom, and the kind of strategic thinking that came from navigating business challenges across decades. Thanks for coming, Cora, she said, leading me through the office. I've admired your work at Blue Flame for years. Their loss is potentially our gain. As we settled into their test kitchen with coffee and pastries, she shared her own story of being pushed aside at a major corporation in her 50s, only to start Kitchen Craft with a commitment to valuing experience. We're at a turning point, Erica explained. Our products have loyal customers, but we need stronger brand recognition to compete nationally. That's where you come in. She outlined her vision: a new role as Executive Vice President of Brand Strategy with full creative control and a seat on their executive committee. The salary was comparable to what Blue Flame had paid me, with additional equity options. Most importantly, all creative work would be contractually protected with clear ownership delineated between company property and my intellectual contributions. We value experience here, Erica said. Half our executive team is over 50. We found that institutional knowledge and proven judgment outperform trendiness every time. As I drove home, I weighed the options. Blue Flame's offer represented vindication, a public acknowledgement that pushing me aside had been a mistake. Kitchen Craft offered a fresh start with a company whose values seemed more aligned with mine. When I walked through our front door, Thomas was waiting with news of his own. Franklin called, he said. Apparently there's been another development at Blue Flame. I called Franklin immediately, putting him on speakerphone. The plot thickens, he said. I received a call from their legal department. Damien has been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. What kind of investigation? I asked. They're examining communications between Damien and Jasmine prior to your departure. It seems they may have had a personal relationship that wasn't disclosed when he pushed for her hiring. I shook my head, thinking of how Damien had preached about authenticity while potentially orchestrating my replacement for personal rather than professional reasons. There's more, Franklin continued. Vivian Harper asked if you'd be willing to meet with the board directly before making your decision about their offer. Tomorrow morning. I get the impression they're quite eager. After hanging up, I turned to Thomas, who had been listening silently. What are you thinking? He asked. I'm thinking I need to hear what the board has to say, I replied. But I'm also thinking Kitchen Craft might be the right move regardless. Thomas nodded. Either way, you're negotiating from strength now. That's quite a turnaround from 6 weeks ago. The decision. The next morning, I dressed carefully for my meeting with Blue Flame's board, a navy blue suit that projected confidence without appearing unapproachable. As I fastened my grandmother's pearl earrings, the ones she'd worn to become the first female bank manager in her small Midwestern town in 1962, I thought about how this day might unfold. The Blue Flame boardroom felt smaller than I remembered. 10 people sat around the polished table with Vivian at the head. Damien's seat was conspicuously empty. Thank you for meeting with us, Cora, Vivian began. We wanted to speak with you directly, without intermediaries. I nodded, maintaining a professional composure despite the tension in the room. I'll be direct, she continued. Damien misrepresented several situations to this board. He claimed you had chosen to retire. He portrayed the Jasmine Winters hire as a strategic partnership rather than a replacement, and he assured us that all marketing materials were unquestionably company property. One of the other board members, Harold, leaned forward. The campaign has been completely pulled. Our social media accounts are dormant. The influencer contract is suspended, and our Q2 product launch is now without marketing support. Frankly, we're in a difficult position. I understand, I said simply. We're prepared to offer you the Chief Brand Officer position with a significant compensation increase, Vivian said. Additionally, we'll purchase your copyrighted materials outright at market value, with full attribution in all future uses. I took a moment before responding. I appreciate the offer. It's very generous, but I've accepted an executive position with Kitchen Craft. The contract was signed yesterday afternoon. The room fell silent. Several board members exchanged glances. I see, Vivian finally said. That's unfortunate for us, though I understand your decision. However, I added, I'm open to licensing my copyrighted materials to Blue Flame under specific conditions. I have no desire to damage the brand I spent 12 years building. What conditions? Harold asked. I outlined my terms. A 3-year licensing agreement at fair market value with my name credited in all uses of the materials, and one more stipulation that caused visible surprise around the table. I want the company to establish a mentorship program for marketing professionals over 45, I said, with dedicated resources for mid-career development. In my mind, I saw my father being pushed out of his manufacturing job, my mother's design being stolen, and countless other professionals whose experience was dismissed as obsolete. This wasn't just about me anymore. Epilogue. 3 months later, I stood in Kitchen Craft's conference room, reviewing our new brand strategy with the marketing team. My office wall featured framed copies of marketing trade publications with headlines like Kitchen Craft's Strategic Coup and Blue Flame's Brand Crisis. a lesson in respecting institutional knowledge. The transition had been smoother than I anticipated. Erica's team welcomed my expertise, and without the need to fight for recognition, I found myself more creative and energized than I'd been in years. Meanwhile, the developments at Blue Flame had played out publicly and painfully. Damien had been terminated after the investigation revealed he'd been dating Jasmine for months before hiring her, a clear conflict of interest he'd hidden from HR and the board. Jasmine's contract had been terminated as well, with her final Instagram post about the situation causing additional PR headaches for the company. The mentorship program I'd required as part of my licensing agreement had launched with significant industry attention. Several marketing professionals over 50 had been hired specifically for their experience in traditional media integration, something Blue Flame had nearly abandoned in their rush to appear cutting edge. Most satisfyingly, the board had restructured their marketing department entirely, implementing new policies that emphasized balanced teams with mixed generational perspectives. Your strategy is working beautifully, Erica commented after reviewing our latest market share numbers. We've gained 3 percentage points against Blue Flame in just one quarter. We're just getting started, I replied. Wait until our holiday campaign launches. That evening, Thomas and I celebrated our wedding anniversary at home, raising glasses to new beginnings, to being out of touch. May we always be beyond the reach of those who don't recognize true value, he toasted with a smile. I responded, clinking my glass against his. Experience may be impossible to counterfeit, but its worth is undeniable to those wise enough to recognize it. I thought about my father, who never found professional redemption after being pushed aside. About my mother, whose creativity was exploited without recognition. About my grandmother, whose determination broke barriers for women in banking. Their stories lived in me, and now, in some small way, I had changed the narrative. Not just for myself, but perhaps for others who would come after me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, but about finding your rightful place and creating space for others to find theirs. Because being out of touch with toxic workplace culture isn't a liability. It's liberation.